Good evening, everyone. So today is the second class of disaster management. In the last class we had discussed about the initial analysis of disaster management overall section. Syllabus क्या है उसका, overall topics क्या होगा, what is the previous papers pattern, all of this, and a few of the observations and suggestions. So then we started with the first part of disaster management, that is basic concepts related to disasters. So we discussed what is hazard, what is disaster, the difference between these two, vulnerability, types of vulnerability, and cause of vulnerability, and indicators of vulnerability. And we discussed capacity development, types of capacity, and risk, the meaning of risk reduction, and overall disaster management cycle. Okay, so that involves pre-disaster, during disaster, post-disaster, and pre-disaster involves mitigation and preparedness. Mitigation के अंदर prevention, risk reduction के अंदर होगा structural and non-structural measures. So preparedness में those measures which are required to be prepared to face the disaster, and to face the disaster is response, that is during disaster, and post-disaster is recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction. We had just discussed so various initiatives that should be taken under these headings. So I hope it's all clear till now. Any doubts? Shall we continue? Fine. So let's start with the second part of this disaster management unit, and I would suggest you guys to take running notes in this unit. क्योंकि थोड़ा बहुत factual है, there is no point in dictating. So please लिखते जाओ. So आप लोग अगर थोड़ा सा कोऑपरेट किया तो let's try to finish up this disaster management overall area in next class. Okay, अगर थोड़ा सा नॉन कोऑपरेशन मूवमेंट शुरू किया तो एक और क्लास हो जाएगा. कोऑपरेशन मतलब basically I would suggest you to take running notes and be little quick, and that is possible if you give little bit more attention in the class. ठीक है, चलो let's start with the second unit. Initiatives for disaster management. Okay, we know the overall idea of disaster management. क्या होता है, what is the major thing about disaster management, क्या क्या initiatives लेना है, So now based on that, what are the initiatives which we have taken at the national level, international level? ठीक है, मेजर इनिशिएटिव्स के बात करेंगे, छोटा मोटा इनिशिएटिव्स तो होगा ही, which you have to see from current affairs. Okay, the major initiatives. चलो. So yes, even I would want to finish because there's no point in dragging it for 4 classes. So let's try to finish it up. चलो, the first part. Let's talk about the initiatives taken in India. India level पे जो किया है national initiatives. Then we'll go for international initiatives. And before we actually discuss about the initiatives taken at the national level, let's discuss पहले कैसे था. मतलब one of the major initiative taken in India for disaster management is enacting the National Disaster Management Act. National Disaster Management Act, NDMA 2005. It was brought in 2005. So what was the situation before 2005? Let's just briefly see that. See, before 2005, there was no such thing called a framework, law, rules, regulation. There was nothing. There is no actual process of disaster management at all. So India totally followed reactive approach. India totally followed reactive approach. Reactive matlab whenever there is a disaster in the country, they will call up the army, navy, air force, and जिनको जो पास में हैं उनको भेजो, they will try to rescue. Right? There is no setup as such. कैसे deal करना है, कैसे handle करना है, how to rescue, how to rehabilitate them, and is there any concept of preparing for disaster? No, there was nothing. There was totally nothing. So India had no preparation at all for disaster management. Okay. Preparation for disaster management, कुछ ऐसे कुछ concept ही नहीं था. And that concept came with the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. So how exactly it came up? How exactly it evolved? The first major beginning, we can trace it to 1994 Yokohama Conference. Okay, please keep writing. Yokohama Conference. 1994. So this was the World Conference on Natural Disaster Reduction. The World Conference on Natural Disaster Reduction. This was the first World Conference which happened at international level, where all the countries came together and they wanted to discuss about the disaster and disaster management. Because most of the countries have started to see increase in the number of disasters, which is evident, which is very clearly evident, which is since the last 20-30 years, a number of disasters have started to increase. So that's why most of the countries came forward and they started to discuss, they wanted to discuss. So they met, all of these countries met in one particular conference, and that was the first world conference which happened in 1994. So this conference emphasized the importance of preparedness and mitigation. Okay, I hope you are writing this. It emphasized the importance of preparedness and mitigation. There was no such concept of preparedness and mitigation before this at the world level. Okay, दुनिया में मतलब all of the countries, they had their own methods of preparing for this. There was method of dealing with the disaster. So at 1994 Yokohama Conference, they said, okay, there is a necessity of being prepared. क्योंकि that is what is disaster management. By being prepared, we can reduce the losses. ठीक है, India भी participate किया था. They said we expected that we will learn something from this, but we did not do anything after this Yokohama Conference. We did not take any initiative at all. Preparedness के बारे में करना है, mitigation के बारे में करना है, सारा बातें हो गया, बस खत्म हो गया. Then the business as usual. 1999 Odisha super cyclone. In 1999, Odisha super cyclone came. I guess many of you were very small kids at that point of time, or maybe few of you are not born, maybe. So I clearly remember that situation. One of the worst disasters which India had faced. It caused huge destruction in terms of property, lives, infrastructure, बहुत सारा disturb हो गया था. So nobody was prepared. There is no framework. There is no method to deal with that particular disaster. So at that point of time, the government appointed a high-powered committee, HPC, high-powered committee on disaster management. The government appointed a high-powered committee after the disaster. Okay, after the disaster, the government appointed a high-powered committee on disaster management. बोला है कि यार डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट कैसे करना है, आप लोग थोड़ा सा रिसर्च करके बता दो. This high-powered committee recommended for a specific legal and constitutional framework. Okay, it recommended for specific legal and constitutional framework to deal with disasters in India. Okay, it said that जो भी organizational structure होना चाहिए, it should have clear powers. Okay, you need to have a specific organizational structure with clear powers based on statutory as well as constitutional provisions, so that this organization can deal with the disasters more effectively. This is what this high-powered committee had said. But as usual, government kept these recommendations aside and it did not take any action at all. The next, in 2001, Bhuj earthquake happened. Bhuj earthquake. ये भी बहुत खतरनाक डिजास्टर था. Again, this one caught the entire government off guard. Okay, so basically nobody was prepared, nobody did anything. People were not at all aware. It resulted in huge loss of life as well as property. So at this point of time, government appointed, चलो ये तो तब recommend किया था ऐसा बोल के, it appointed a disaster management division. एक division बना दिया within home ministry. होम मिनिस्ट्री के अंदर एक डिवीजन बना के दे सेड ओके आप लोग देख लेना यार डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट कैसे करना है, एंड इट प्रोवाइडेड सम काइंड ऑफ हायरार्कियल स्ट्रक्चर without any kind of power. And this was totally inadequate to deal with disaster in India, and there was no such kind of initiatives were taken under this disaster management division. And finally, it took a huge tsunami to bring legislation. That was in 2004 December. If you remember, 2004 December Christmas दिन के next day आया था tsunami. ये तो कुछ लोगों को याद रहेगा, आप लोगों को 2004. This was the worst disaster which India had ever faced in the recent times. Okay, the worst disaster. It killed large number of people. People were not at all aware, and we had no net framework to deal with this kind of disaster. Then immediately after that, in 2005, the government passed National Disaster Management Act. That was in 2005. This is how it evolved. So what is this National Disaster Management Act? Excuse me. What are the various provisions of National Disaster Management Act? आपको ये याद होना चाहिए. You should remember completely as it is. ठीक है? Major provisions of National Disaster Management Act. There can be a question in this. There can be some more specific questions also, other than the overall provisions. There can be some specific questions also. So just be ready. So what is this National Disaster Management Act? The Act overall, it provides for institutional framework and institutional mechanism to deal with disaster management in India. Okay, जो idea था पहले, there was no such idea called as disaster management before we brought the National Disaster Management Act. So all of it was reactive approach. जब disaster होगा, we'll deal with that. Then we shifted to proactive approach. That means we'll be prepared to face the disaster before the disaster happens. उसके लिए we need to take certain measures, the preparedness measures, the mitigation measures in order to reduce the risk, in order to prevent the disaster if it is possible. All of this, इसके लिए we needed a proper framework, proper mechanism. And that was brought by the National Disaster Management Act. So that is why we say the National Disaster Management Act is a major landmark initiative taken by the government of India in its change of approach from reactive to proactive approach to deal with disasters. So it provided for a proper mechanism for dealing with disaster management in India. So what is this overall framework? Framework क्या दिया था इसके अंदर? एक्ट के अंदर The National Disaster Management Act provides for certain authorities, certain committees, certain institutions, and some other organizations. The first one, different authorities. Authorities कौन होते हैं? Authorities are basically part of executives. They are part of executives, right? One who is responsible for implementing this, one who is made accountable. इनका काम होगा ये सारा काम करना. So there are different authorities at different levels. The first, at the national level, we have National Disaster Management Authority. At the national level, we have National Disaster Management Authority. At the state level, we have State Disaster Management Authority. And at the district level, we have District Disaster Management Authority. Okay, these are basically authority. Authority मतलब क्या है? इनका काम होगा implement करना, जैसे कि गवर्नमेंट ने executives होते हैं. Okay, we have 3 different parts, right? Executive, legislature, judiciary. In the same way, जो actual implementation का काम होगा, ये हमारा authorities. At the national level, it is NDMA. At the state level, it is SDMA. At the district level, it is DDMA. To support the authorities, we have executive committees. EC, executive committees. बेसिकली ये चीजें ऐसे है कि गवर्नमेंट जैसे इनको सपोर्ट करने के लिए जो हमारा सिविल सर्वेंट्स होते हैं, सो दैट इज लाइक एग्जीक्यूटिव कमिटी. ओके, दिस इज लाइक ए मिनिस्टर्स एंड दिस इज लाइक ए सेक्रेटरी. टू सपोर्ट द नेशनल डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट अथॉरिटी, वी हैव नेशनल एग्जीक्यूटिव कमिटी. सी, द नेशनल डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट इज हेडेड बाय whom? It is headed by Prime Minister. Okay, this is a political body. This is a body which is responsible for implementing everything. They are the one who is going to take decision, everything, etc. But they are supported by a group of civil servants, the top civil servants. The secretaries रहता है. So that is National Executive Committee. At the state level, SDMA is headed by Chief Minister, and that is supported by group of civil servants. We call it as State Executive Committee. However, at the district level, there is no such committee called as executive committee because यहां पर जो DDMA है ना, that is headed by civil servant themselves. जो आप लोग आगे जाके बनने वाले, the future civil servants. The district disaster management authority is headed by DM or DC himself. तो इनके लिए और कोई सपोर्ट करने का जरूरी नहीं है. So we have executive committees at national level and at state level, and there is no such executive committee at district level. In addition to this, we have an institute for research purpose. Research purpose के लिए एक institute भी बनाया था, that is National Institute of Disaster Management. National Institute of Disaster Management मतलब जो पढ़ाई करने के लिए, रिसर्च करने के लिए, मेथोडोलॉजी डेवलप करने के लिए, वी हैव नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट. And it also established a force specifically to deal with the disaster. That is what is National Disaster Response Force, NDRF, National Disaster Response Force. Remember, response, R for response, R for not relief. और response कब होगा? During the disaster, right? In addition to this, there is funding mechanism. At the national level, we have 2 funds. At the state level, we have 2 funds. As per the Act. As per the Act, अभी कुछ recent changes हुआ है, उसके बारे में भी discuss करेंगे. But as per the Act, originally it was National Disaster Response Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund, National Disaster Response Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund. At the state level, State Disaster Response Fund and State Disaster Mitigation Fund. This is overall framework of NDMA Act, National Disaster Management Act. And the entire framework should come under one ministry which would act as a nodal ministry. Na? कौन सा है nodal ministry? That is Ministry of Home Affairs. Ministry of Home Affairs is designated as the nodal ministry here. Is that clear? Overall framework, briefly इसके बारे में बात करेंगे. And this overall framework is also represented in this flow chart. ये वाला फ्लो चार्ट आपने देखा होगा. ये भी सेम ही है, जो मैंने लिखा वो भी सेम ही है, तो जो आपको इजी लगे फॉलो कर सकते हो. At the central level we have NDMA, state level SDMA, district level DDMA. NDMA is assisted by NEC, SDMA is assisted by SEC, as well as DDMA would also. We have National Institute of Disaster Management, National Disaster Response Force. Overall comes under the Ministry of Home Affairs. Okay, same here almost as in this table. So जो भी आपको easy लगेगा follow कर सकते हो. No institute at the state level, no force at the state level, and district के लिए there is no separate fund. Okay, there is no institute as such separately for state and district level. तो यहां तक क्लियर है, आगे बढ़े. See, as per the Act, there is no separate force for the state. It is up to the state to establish. State खुद establish कर सकते हैं, but as per the National Act, there is no separate force. Sorry. चलो. So let's just briefly discuss each of these bodies. आप लिखते जाओ, वो better है. Okay, just keep writing. थोड़ा सा information type है. It's better that we do it faster rather than doing it too elaboratively. First one, let's talk about NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority. So basically NDMA is the apex body which deals with the disaster management in India. Apex body मतलब overall executive body, the supreme body whose decision is implemented all over India. जो वो बोलेंगे सबको सुनना ही पड़ेगा. That is what is apex body. It is the apex body for disaster management in India. Who heads the NDMA? देखो स्टेट डिजास्टर रेस्पॉन्स फोर्स का नेसेसिटी विल कम ओनली एट द लोकल लेवल. अगर हर स्टेट का रेस्पॉन्स फोर्स होना चाहिए तो नेशनल फोर्स का क्या काम है? वेयर विल दे गो? द आइडिया ऑफ नेशनल disaster response force is to be ready to deal with any kind of disaster anywhere. They are the one who would be there. They're not going to sit in New Delhi only. They're distributed all across different parts. हर जगह में है. So wherever there is issue, wherever there is disaster, they will rush. That is NDRF. Who heads NDMA? Prime Minister heads NDMA. उनका क्या काम है? What is the work of NDMA? Okay, remember three things. Excuse me. Just a minute. I'll just be back. Sorry. See, the role of Home Minister is in terms of coordination. Okay, decision making is done by the body, that is NDMA, and NDMA is headed by Prime Minister. But इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि it is only Prime Minister. Okay, there would be other ministers including Home Minister also. चलो आगे बढ़ते हैं. So in the context of disaster management, there are three important things. One is a policy, second one is a plan, and third one is a guideline. तीन चीजों के बारे में आप लोगों ने सुना होगा. You might have heard. Policy, plan, and guideline. So what exactly are these? Policy is a broader perspective on overall action to be taken. So basically बस बड़े बड़े बातें हैं, ज्यादा कुछ काम का नहीं होता है उसमें. It will set the overall direction. Okay, overall direction. किस direction में हमें क्या काम करना है and in which method which we would follow. That overall objective, that is what is policy. Plan is basically little bit more detailed than policy. A plan aims to implement the policy. Okay, a plan aims to implement the policy in a more specific way, with a clear-cut clear-cut activities to be taken, clear-cut targets. That is what is actual plan. Guideline is much more detailed. A policy talks about overall disaster management. Plan talks about again overall disaster management plan bolte hain. Overall all the disasters. But guidelines is disaster specific. We will have guidelines for earthquake, guidelines for tsunami, guidelines for landslides ऐसे. Okay, they are all separate. ठीक है, ये तो clear है. NDMA has the overall power authority to lay down all these three: a national plan, a national policy, and national guidelines to deal with disasters in India. It is responsible for laying down, मतलब बनाना है उनको. Not only laying down, also to implement. उन्हीं का ही काम है. They will make the policy, they will implement the policy. They will make the plan, they will implement the plan. They will make the guidelines and they will also implement the guidelines. So overall काम है उनका to lay down the policies, plans and guidelines at the national level and to implement them at the national level. In addition to all of this, NDMA also has the responsibility to provide a timely response to any disasters in India. मतलब कोई बड़ा disaster हो जाए, जो लोकल लेवल में होता है, SDMA and DDMA will take care of it, but कोई भी बड़ा disaster होगा, that comes under the responsibility of NDMA. NDMA has to take care of it. It has the primary responsibility for effective and timely response to disasters. ठीक है? So this is overall NDMA. While doing this job, NDMA is actually supported by NEC, National Executive Committee. While doing this job, ये जो काम अभी बताया था, तो इसका सपोर्ट के लिए वी हैव नेशनल एग्जीक्यूटिव कमेटी. व्हाट इज नेशनल एग्जीक्यूटिव कमेटी? बेसिकली ये जो काम इनका होता है, ये लोग करते हैं. जैसे मिनिस्ट्री के अंदर जो काम होते हैं, इट्स नॉट डन बाय मिनिस्टर देमसेल्व्स, राइट? इट इज डन बाय द सिविल सर्वेंट. सेक्रेटरीट में जो बैठता है, काम वो करते, अप्रूव ये लोग करते, इसका जो एक्चुअल बेनिफिट है ये लोग उठाते हैं. इन द सेम वे दे आर जस्ट सपोर्टिंग देम. National Executive Committee is made up of bureaucrats. Who are they? National Executive Committee is headed by Home Secretary. Because it is coming under the Home Ministry, the Home Secretary heads the National Executive Committee along with few other secretaries from other departments. Their job is to assist NDMA in performing their duties. उनको assist करना है. At the same time, not only to assist, even to coordinate and monitor the activities taken by NDMA. NDMA जो भी काम कर रहा है, many of the works would require the coordination between the different departments, different ministries, and also the planning, all of this work that is done by National Executive Committee. And at the same time, जो भी उनका काम है उसको मॉनिटर करने के लिए we wanted someone, right? So that is also done by National Executive Committee itself. चलो ठीक है. Fine. The National Executive Committee is headed by Home Secretary with other secretaries as members. Its main work is to assist NDMA in its functioning and also to coordinate and monitor the activities of NDMA. Okay, what were the activities of NDMA? Policy, plan and guidelines. The various policies, various plans and guidelines which are made by NDMA. To implement that, we have NDMA, and to monitor that, monitor the implementation, we have National Executive Committee. In addition to this, at the national level, other than what is prescribed in this National Disaster Management Act, we have two more bodies at the national level, which is not under NDMA Act. But still they come under disaster management. The issue of disaster management ke andar, they will come. That is, one is Cabinet Committee on Security. See, there is no mention of Cabinet Committee on Security under Disaster Management Act, but still Cabinet Committee on Security deals with some aspects of disaster management. So what is that? So what exactly is Cabinet Committee on Security? It's a Cabinet Committee headed by Prime Minister. Among the various Cabinet Committee, this is one of the very important Cabinet Committee, headed by Prime Minister and other ministers as members. They will evaluate disaster management in the country from the national security perspective. That means whatever the disasters and disaster management initiatives which are happening in India, so they will try to go through that and see if there is any implication for the national security. If there is any large scale disaster which are happening in the border area that might disturb the security over there, so then who will take the decision? It is not NDMA, it is the Cabinet Committee on Security. This is the highest decision making body in the context of security, right? So disaster management might also result in security lapses or security issue. So the Cabinet Committee on Security will also see any kind of disaster and disaster management initiatives from the perspective of security. In addition to this, there is also NDMA Advisory Committee. NDMA Advisory Committee. What is this advisory committee? This is a 15-member committee under NDMA. Within NDMA, it is just the advisory committee, which is made up of 15 members. And these 15 members are from various different fields, from within the government, private sector, academia, NGOs, civil society. From various different fields, you will choose 15 members, and they are the ones who act as advisory body for NDMA. NDMA has to take decisions, right? What to be decided, what decision should be taken, what not to be taken, what to be implemented, what not to be implemented. All these decisions will be recommended by NDMA Advisory Committee, and final decision will be taken by NDMA, and that will be held by National Executive Committee. Okay, simple. Is that clear? This is the overall framework at the national level. Let's proceed to state level. Same thing, replicate in state, you will get the state level framework. At the state level, the apex body at the state level in a particular state is SDMA, the State Disaster Management Authority. So the State Disaster Management Authority, it's there in all the states. What about union territories? What about union territories? Can somebody tell me? Who is the apex body in union territories? In states, we have State Disaster Management Authority. At the national level, we have National Disaster Management Authority. What about union territories? Yes, it is natural to think that it should come under NDMA, but it is not. It is not. It's a wrong answer. That's because this is disaster management. This is not some administrative work, okay, for which you can always refer to the central government. No. Disaster management requires immediate step. Okay, immediate response is required. You cannot wait for the direction from the central government. So it does not come under NDMA. Every union territory also has its own DDMA. Sorry, SDMA. बस नाम में स्टेट रहता है, but it applies to even union territory also. Fine. It is not every union territory will have its own SDMA also. For example, Delhi, NCR has its own SDMA, State Disaster Management Authority. It will not come under NDMA directly. Overall disaster management of India will come under NDMA. In the same way, union territories also come under NDMA. But to deal with the disaster management over there, they have their SDMA directly. So basically SDMA is for all the states and union territories. In case of state, it is headed by Chief Minister. In case of union territories, it is headed by the Lieutenant Governor, or if there is a legislative assembly, again the Chief Minister. So their job, what is their job? It is very similar to the job of NDMA. The way they have laying down the policies, plans and guidelines at the national level, SDMA will lay down the policy, plans and guidelines at the state level. They will not only lay down, they will also implement at the state level. Same, it is very similar to NDMA. And they are also supported by State Executive Committee, the way National Executive Committee is there. Only difference is that the National Executive Committee is headed by Home Secretary, State Executive Committee is headed by Chief Secretary. The Chief Secretary of State heads the State Executive Committee. Again, its work is also same, to coordinate the functions of SDMA and to monitor the functions of SDMA in terms of state plans, state policies and state guidelines. Not only state plans, state policies and state guidelines, even to implement the national plan, national policy, national guidelines, again, these bodies will work together. That is State Executive Committee. At the district level, we have only one body, that is DDMA, District Disaster Management Authority. Every district of India, whether it is state or union territory, every district will have its own DDMA, headed by DM or DC of that particular district. So what is the function of this? See, it is the DDMA which actually does the function of disaster management. Whatever NDMA is there, whatever SDMA is there, they will just overall, they say, we will do this, we will do that. Who is going to implement and where exactly they are going to implement? That has to be done at the district level only. So the actual work of disaster management is done by DDMA. So it involves planning, coordination, implementation of disaster management at the district level. Planning, coordination and implementation of disaster management. Whatever the initiatives, whether it is suggested at the national level or at the state level, whether it is a guideline or a plan or a policy, whatever the initiative, it has to be implemented at the district level only, and that work is done by DDMA. It takes all the measures to ensure that the district is disaster prone. If a disaster occurs, who will work, NDMA or SDMA? It is neither, it is DDMA. NDMA and SDMA will just give the guidelines, orders. The implementation is done by DDMA. Work of SDMA, I have already told you, it is very similar to NDMA but only at the state level. The way laying down of policy, plans and guidelines at the national level, here it is at the state level. Not only laying down, even implementation. So basically it is the DDMA which is responsible for taking all the precautionary measures, all the pre-disaster management measures, not only pre-disaster, even during disaster as well as post-disaster. It is DDMA. It takes all the relief measures and response measures in the context of disaster. So all the three stages which we discussed, pre-disaster, during disaster, post-disaster, who is going to implement that? It is our DDMA. So during your foundation course, during your administrative training, disaster management is one of the very important aspects which you will be trained with. Okay, because it is the major work of a civil servant at the district level. One of the major works. All the rest, there is a hierarchy, they will do their work, they will take the decision. But in case of disaster management, it is the responsibility of the IAS officers in that district. Okay, we'll come to the force. Before that, National Institute of Disaster Management. What is this National Institute? It is a research institute with the aim of developing policies, developing training modules, developing guidelines, overall in terms of research and development. Okay, training the human resource. For all this purpose, we wanted an institute, and that is why we have National Institute of Disaster Management. Where is this National Institute of Disaster Management? It's in New Delhi. It's very nearby. National Institute of Disaster Management. You can hear ITO circle जहां पर where there is this Indian Institute of Public Administration. So now let's talk about NDRF, National Disaster Response Force. What is this National Disaster Response Force? It is a specialized force set up for dealing with the response activities of disaster management. When will we have the response activities? During disasters, right? So before 2005, we had no specific force to deal with disasters. So every time there is a disaster, we used to call Army, Navy, Air Force, CRPF, CSF, whoever is available, we used to call them. Why? Because they are the ones who are trained to deal with tough situation, difficult situation. But the thing is, they were not trained to deal with disasters in a specific manner. Because every disaster requires the operations, the rescue operations in a specific manner. Earthquakes rescue operations are different from the flood rescue operations. We need to train our force in a very specific manner, right? So that's why, with that aim of training the force in a very specific manner to deal with the disaster situation, we established this National Disaster Response Force. What is this National Disaster Response Force? Who are they? Basically, it's a force made up of various battalions taken on deputation basis from our CAPF. What is CAPF? Central Armed Police Force. Central Armed Police Force is basically made up of BSF, CRPF, SSB, ITBP and CASF. Okay, there are total of 5 forces which we call as Central Armed Police Forces. So from this they have taken selective battalions who are specifically trained on deputation basis. They will take for a few years. They will be trained specifically and they will be posted in the few different locations. These NDRF is posted in various different locations of India. So based on the occurrence of particular disaster, for example, landslide related, so they will be in Himalayas and Western Ghats. Floods related near to the river valleys, right, like that. So depending upon the proximity, depending upon the potential, these NDRF forces are placed all over India. They come under the general direction and control of, overall general direction and control of NDMA. NDMA is responsible for sending this National Disaster Response Force. This is a very specific force. Any doubts still here? These are the things which are suggested, which are provided by the National Disaster Management Act. Funding we'll talk separately. We need to discuss the funding mechanism separately, so we'll come to that. So other than that, any other doubts? When there is no disaster, what will NDRF do? They will just train, they will do exercise, they will keep them fit, themselves fit. Any other doubts? Shall we proceed? See, it's not like this force will have any kind of free time. So they will have to undergo continuous training, continuous learning. Then only they will be ready, right? So let's talk about the funding mechanism as per our National Disaster Management Act. So there has been no question on this, but one of the most potential area where the question can be asked. What is the funding mechanism? From where exactly the fund comes for all the activities taken under National Disaster Management Act? So the National Disaster Management Act provides for two different types of funds, which I have written here. One is the response fund, another one is mitigation fund. Response fund, mitigation fund, both at the national level as well as at the state level. At the national level, we have National Disaster Response Fund, and at the state level, we have State Disaster Response Fund. At the national level, we have National Disaster Mitigation Fund, and at the state level, we have State Disaster Mitigation Fund. What are these funds? Let's just discuss briefly about this. National Disaster Response Fund and State Disaster Response Fund. Let's talk about the Response Fund first. National Disaster Response Fund and State Disaster Response Fund. So basically the overall idea of having a response fund is to fund the response activities. Funding is very important thing, right? ये तो बहुत जरूरी है. Without money you cannot do anything. Anything मतलब ठीक है, जो major things which are done in the real world, right? So it is very much required, the funding mechanism. And for response activities, response is when? During the disaster. Whenever there is a disaster, for rescue operations, we need some kind of money, resources, material, everything. And for that purpose, the Act provides for a fund at the national level, a fund at the state level. This is as per the National Disaster Management Act. The Act says that there should be a separate national fund and each state should have a state fund to deal with the rescue and relief operations. So rescue and response operations. Relief अलग है. Relief के लिए it's post. To meet any kind of disaster situations. But before the Act came in 2005. Right? Before the Act came, there was another special fund called as National Calamity Contingency Fund, NCCF. National Calamity Contingency Fund was there to deal with the response activities, but it had no statutory backup. And this fund was raised by levying a duty called as National Calamity Contingency Duty, NCCD. Duty is for imports, right? It was imposed, it was levied on petrol, crude oil and some of the cars, okay, automobiles. जो imported automobiles था ना, उसके ऊपर they were levying and they were funding this fund, National Calamity Contingency Fund. This was the mechanism before 2005. After 2005, the Act provided for National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund, both at the national level as well as the state level. This fund was removed and this duty was continued, which is used even now to fund the National Disaster Response Fund. How is the State Disaster Response Fund is funded? कहां से आएगा पैसा इस फंड को? The individual states will levy the duties, taxes within the state list. उसके अंदर जो भी उनका जो list होगा, wherever there is a provision, it is up to them. They can raise the money through that. Okay, उनका खुद का देखना पड़ेगा. But at the national level, it is the National Calamity Contingency Duty which is still being imposed on petrol, crude oil and some automobiles. Fine. There is no fund right now. Right now there is no fund, but the duty is continuing and this duty is funding the National Disaster Response Fund. State Disaster Response Fund, they will have to fund themselves. जो भी whatever the funding comes under the state, they will try to raise it by themselves. But you might ask, we have two different funds. One is National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund. What is the need of two different funds? Anyway, you have to spend the money at the state level only, at the district level only. The money should come to that particular state only. ऐसे तो national मतलब national तो अलग, there is no separate nation other than states, right? Yes. So basically, the State Disaster Response Fund is used first. Whenever there is a disaster at any particular district or state, the money will be released from State Disaster Response Fund. But the State Disaster Response Fund of different states, they are not that big. They don't have that much of money. So whenever there is a big calamity, big disaster, which are called as the notified disaster, the list of disaster notified by NDMA. Okay, they gives out a list of disaster. ये list होगा and they are eligible for funding ऐसे बोल के. If there is any kind of notified disaster which is happening in a big level, only in that case, beyond the money spent by State Disaster Response Fund, NDRF will release the money. NDRF will not release the money until SDRF spends its money. Only in the case the state is exceeding its limit and the disaster is too big, in that case NDRF will release the money. For example, COVID-19. COVID-19 was also declared as one of the notified disasters so that the states can avail the money from NDRF. Is that clear? The funding from SDRF is used only for local disaster at the local level, specified disaster at the local level. If there is any big disaster which is going beyond the capacity of SDRF, in that case NDRF will release money. This is for response activities. For mitigation activities, the Act provides for separate fund. What is the difference between response and mitigation? Mitigation is those activities which are taken before the disaster. Response is during the disaster, right? Even to implement certain measures, even to take some precautions, we need money, right? That is what is National Disaster Mitigation Fund and State Disaster Mitigation Fund. The Act provides for these two funds in order to mitigate the disasters. Both at the national level as well as at the state level. However, till recently, the government had not set up this fund at all. बहुत recently आया है, इसके बारे में बात करते हैं. Till recently, the government was saying for mitigation activities, we are taking separate initiatives. Every disaster has a separate initiative to deal with the mitigation. For example, National Earthquake Mitigation Program, National Cyclone Risk Mitigation Program, National Landslide Risk Mitigation Program. ऐसे अलग-अलग mitigation program है. Mitigation is a very important step, right? So it has been separated. So the government was saying we have separate programs for that. Why do we need to establish another fund? So let's not establish. Saying this, they had not established any fund at all till recently. However, recently, when the 15th Finance Commission gave its recommendation, few of the things were changed. After the recommendations of 15th Finance Commission. So any doubts still here? Yes. During cyclone, Odisha first will spend from SDRF, then it will ask money from NDRF. NDMA will grant that money. मिटिगेशन मीन्स बिफोर द डिजास्टर ओनली, राइट? दैट इज द मीनिंग ऑफ मिटिगेशन, राइट? प्री डिजास्टर का फर्स्ट स्टेज था मिटिगेशन, याद है? So NDMF is for all the activities which should be taken before the disaster. Pre-disaster management के लिए we have this mitigation fund. But that was not established till now. So what are the recommendations of 15th Finance Commission? The 15th Finance Commission is trying to overhaul the entire funding mechanism under NDMA. It has recommended major restructuring of the entire funding mechanism. So this is important to yaad rakhna, and please keep noting it down. The first important recommendation, it says, please establish only two funds at the national level and state level. One fund at the national level, one fund at the state level, which will take care of everything, which is called as National Disaster Risk Management Fund. What is the name of this? There should be only one overall fund, that is National Disaster Risk Management Fund at the national level, State Disaster Risk Management Fund at the state level. 15th Finance Commission बोलता है कि इतना सारा फंडिंग में कंफ्यूजन हो जाता है. लेट्स हैव ओनली वन फंड एट द नेशनल लेवल, दैट इज नेशनल रिस्क मैनेजमेंट फंड, एंड स्टेट लेवल में स्टेट डिजास्टर रिस्क मैनेजमेंट फंड. ठीक है. सी पीएम केयर्स इज डिफरेंट, विल टॉक अबाउट दैट. पहले इसका सुनो, 15th फाइनेंस कमीशन का सुनो पहले. Overall funding would be National Disaster Risk Management Fund and State Disaster Risk Management Fund. This will come under NDMA. This will come under SDMA. But this fund will have two subcategories. This overall fund will have two subcategories. One is National Disaster Response Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund. This fund will have two subcategories. One is State Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Mitigation Fund. ठीक है. जो पहले वाला था वही था, थोड़ा बहुत रिस्ट्रक्चरिंग करके कंबाइन किया है. The overall fund should be called as National Disaster Risk Management Fund and State Disaster Risk Management Fund. This will have National Disaster Response Fund, National Disaster Mitigation Fund at the state level also the same. It says whatever the money which comes under National Disaster Risk Management Fund, 80% should go for response activities and 20% should go for mitigation activities. Here also 80% should go for response activities and 20% should go for mitigation activities. Basically it is saying that जो भी government बहाना बना के अभी तक establish नहीं किया था, whatever the mitigation fund which has not been established till now, it is asking the government to establish the mitigation fund at both national level and state level and put them under the overall funding of National Disaster Risk Management Fund as well as the state ones. But here the government is saying we already have many of the mitigation initiatives, we have national programs for that. But here the 15th Finance Commission is saying these mitigation funds should be used for local level mitigations. Local level mitigation activities. Whatever the mitigation initiatives which you have taken, let it run at the national level. Let's continue that. But at the local level, whatever the local initiatives which should be taken, for that you need to provide money for mitigation, and that should be done through these mitigation funds. The national fund, the central government will take care of it. How to raise it, it's their worry. State disaster risk management fund, most of the states were complaining that they don't have money for this fund. For this purpose, the 15th Finance Commission is saying that the central government should contribute. It should contribute at the ratio of 75:25 for all the states and 90:10 for northeast and Himalayan states. The money for state disaster risk management fund will come with the contribution of both central and state government in this ratio. National fund तो पूरा center का ही responsibility है. And now comes from where the money will come. At this point of time, only NCCD is being levied. What is NCCD? National Calamity Contingency Duty. That is being levied, right? The 15th Finance Commission is saying that in addition to this, please give some budgetary allocation also. Please make provisions in the budget itself to allocate fund for both national and state levels. Is that clear? This is overall funding mechanism. Yes, we need to talk about PM CARES. So one is we have PM Relief Fund. Another one is we have PM CARES. You might have heard about Prime Minister Relief Fund, Chief Minister Relief Fund. So now there is PM CARES. So what are these funds? These are not the funds from the government end. These are just the voluntary contributions. It is open for everyone to contribute in these funds. The government will spend it according to its own wish. The original fund was PM Relief Fund. Prime Minister Relief Fund was established by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1948 to raise money for dealing with the after impacts of partition in 1948. To support the people who are affected by partition, he said, let's contribute money individually. People started to contribute, and that fund was continued after that for any kind of disasters. There are no budgetary allocations, there are no duties or taxes levied for this fund. It is totally voluntary, totally from public. And how the government will spend? Earlier, as per the PM Relief Fund, the Prime Minister will select who are the beneficiaries. Prime Minister will choose. With that trust, the people have given money, so Prime Minister will choose kahan par spend karna hai. Okay, where exactly he has to spend. So that was PM Relief Fund. So, but during the pandemic, the government started another fund, PM CARES Fund. And if you ask me the difference, there is no difference between these two. It is totally same. It is totally from the voluntary contributions. There are no budgetary allocations. There are no taxations. Only difference is that here earlier the Prime Minister was selecting who are the beneficiaries. Now Prime Minister, along with that, there are two other ministers who will participate, and they will together decide where to spend and how much to spend at all. And this has been there in the court. People were saying that this should come under RTA and all, and the government court itself has clearly rejected, saying that this will not come under RTA because the government has said so. It will not come under NDRF, it will not come under any of the government. It is beyond these funding mechanism. Any doubts here? So funding was a little bit important. I have told you it is one of the most potential area. So there was no question till now. So please be prepared. So let's move ahead. The last part, the criticism of National Disaster Management Act. What are the various criticism? The first major criticism in the context of its working. The National Disaster Management Authority is responsible for the implementation of major initiatives for disaster management in India. Will there be audit for these funds? For PM CARE? For PM CARES there is no audit. PM CARE, PM Relief, there is no audit. For NDRF, NDMF, there would be audit. Of course there would be audit. Okay, let's talk about the criticism. The first major criticism is regarding the working of NDMA. It is an authority which is responsible for implementing various projects for mitigation measures, prevention measures. It is said, as per even the CAG report, the CAG report also says that NDMA's working is very, very poor. Many of the projects initiated by NDMA are incomplete. They are left in between, or they have been restructured into something else. Very poor working conditions. And NDMA has no much control over SDMA. NDMA is a national body. SDMA is a subordinate body. But still it will not exercise much control, subordination. उनको काम करवाना ये सब तो कुछ नहीं होता है, because there is not much of actual working of these bodies only. Only in this recent pandemic we have seen the role of NDMA. Of course, it has done a good job. There is another thing, but still, considering the other disaster, it could have done better. There is not much control over SDMA and DDMA. Many of the posts in NDMA is still vacant. Including the National Disaster Management Advisory Committee. Many of the posts are continuously vacant. There is no appointments for long time. In addition to this, the overall approach which we can see is a top-down approach. Top-down approach is control from the central level, which is totally criticized. At this point of time, to manage any particular disaster, everywhere across the world, they suggest bottom-up approach. They say community should participate, the local self-government should participate. There is no talk of local governments, there is no talk of NGOs, there is not much involvement of local community as per the act. The overall approach is a top-down approach which is totally criticized. Second ARC has suggested various recommendations at that point of time, which is still valid. What are the important recommendations of second ARC in this context? Second ARC says that disaster management should be the primary responsibility of state. State should take the primary responsibility of disaster management and center should just play a supportive role. And even with that state, it should bring the local communities, local self-governments into the forefront. Which has not been implemented yet. Second ARC also says that the disaster should be categorized into national disaster, state disaster, district disaster and local disasters, so that we can plan the measures accordingly depending upon the scale. Even this has not been done. There is no official categorization of disasters at different levels. And there is a major misuse of fund. Regarding misuse of funds, the second ARC has suggested a very severe punishment. If there is any issue, any incident of misuse of fund which is related for disaster management, that should be severely punished. These are some of the recommendations of second ARC. So this is overall about National Disaster Management Act of 2005. Any doubts here? Second ARC first point was disaster management should be made as the primary responsibility of state. The central government should play just supportive role. Okay, there is some थोड़ा सा flow में है. Let's try to fasten and finish the next topic. Then I'll give you a break. I'll give you a break at 7 o'clock. Fine. So talking about the major initiatives taken in India, the first major initiative is of course the National Disaster Management Act of 2005. Within the act, it says that National Disaster Management Authority has the responsibility to bring different policies, plans and guidelines. So even though this was done in 2005, there was no national policy on disaster management at all till 2009. It was in 2009, India brought its first national policy on disaster management. This is the second major initiative after the National Disaster Management Act. Okay, the second major initiative is National Disaster Management Policy of 2009. So basically बहुत broader idea इसके अंदर है. Please try to remember few of the headings. What are the major objectives of this policy? What exactly they are trying to achieve? So what is a policy anyway? Policy is basically a broader outline of whatever the various initiatives which the government wants to take. Okay, it wants to take, it wants to work in this direction. I said declare karta hai na, that is what is policy. This was done in 2009 and this is the current policy also. The government did not bring any other policy after this. So what is the overall policy? Try to remember 4-5 points. Galti se question aa gaya to bhi you can write this. Even if by mistake it comes. Okay, I don't want to elaborate here. Just remember few important points. What are the important points here? Overall idea is to promote the culture of prevention, preparedness and resilience. Encouraging mitigation measures. Mainstreaming disaster management into developmental planning process. Ye yaad rakho. This is a very important statement, which we will talk about it later. Mainstreaming disaster management into developmental planning process. That means to bring disaster management perspective in every kind of developmental activity. Whether it is highway construction, railway construction or building settlements, koi bhi developmental activity hoga, you need to think in the context of disaster management. That is what is mainstreaming disaster management into developmental planning process. Efficient mechanism for identification, assessment and monitoring of disaster risk. Developing forecasting and early warning systems. अंडरटेकिंग, हाँ ये वाला भी याद रखो, अंडरटेकिंग रिकंस्ट्रक्शन एज अपॉर्चुनिटी टू बिल्ड डिजास्टर रेजिलिएंट स्ट्रक्चर्स. Please remember this statement also. So overall idea is to see the reconstruction as an opportunity to build better infrastructure and proactive partnership with media. Okay, overall try to remember few of the objectives, that would be sufficient. So this is second major initiative. The third major initiative is actually, I'll share the PPT, please go through that. The second major initiative was NDM, National Disaster Management Policy is the second major initiative. Okay, pehle we discussed about before 2005, then National Disaster Management Act, then National Disaster Management Policy of 2009, National Disaster Management Plan of 2016. National Disaster Management Plan of 2016. This is next major initiative taken by the Government of India. Okay, again if you go back to NDMA's overall responsibility, वहां पर दिया था policy, plan and guidelines. Guidelines के बारे में तो already बता दिया. There are various separate guidelines for each disaster. Policy तो है, we have one policy, overall broader policy. But plan, we have two plans. One is National Disaster Management Plan of 2016 and it was updated in 2019. We have two plans which are brought by the Government of India. One in 2016, another one is 2019. Okay, we'll discuss this, then I'll give you a break. What exactly do you mean by plan? Plan is much more targeted than policy. Policy gives the broader overall objective, broader idea of the entire work of disaster management to be done in India, whereas plan tries to make it little bit more specific. Okay, in a more targeted approach. So why did we bring a plan in 2016? That's because of compulsion. It is not just because we have a provision in National Disaster Management Act. The Act was brought in 2005. It took nearly 11 years for the government to bring a plan. What exactly should be done? And that too we did it as a compulsion under Sendai framework. Okay, we'll talk about the Sendai framework as one of the international initiative. Abhi yaad rakho, Sendai framework is the present framework of disaster management risk reduction initiative at the international level. At the international level, India signed the Sendai framework as a commitment. वहां पर एक commitment था, every country should have its own national plan. The Sendai framework was signed in 2015 and this plan was brought in 2016. So what are the major highlights of this plan? What exactly this plan aims to achieve? So if you go to the website of National Disaster Management Authority, NDMA Authority की website में गया तो you will find these plans. Both the plans are there. It is a document of around 200-250 pages. It talks about overall disaster को कैसे handle करना है with specific targets and inputs. There is no program. There is nothing called program. Either it is policy or it is plan or it is guideline. There is no program as such. Okay, program, you might be talking about initiative for particular disaster, national risk, earthquake risk mitigation program. Okay, you might be referring to that. So वो तो mitigation program है. मतलब mitigation के लिए earthquake के context में क्या क्या करना है? On the ground, for that government is running that scheme. It's a kind of scheme. ठीक है? वो अलग है. That is not under the act. There is no direct provision related to programs as such. So what exactly is this National Disaster Management Plan? Overall, it aims to provide a direction and framework for disaster management in India. It provides for a direction and framework for disaster management in India. मतलब there are provisions, legal provisions under the act, there are broad objectives discussed under the policy, but there are no clear set of initiatives and guidelines for overall management of disaster in India. For that we wanted a plan. Overall, what exactly is that plan? What are the major highlights? The first highlight, it provides for comprehensive definition of various disasters in India. Each disaster is specifically defined. If you go to that plan's document, PDF, you might find it there. So in that, each disaster is discussed separately. First, you take earthquake. What is earthquake? What are the areas impacted by earthquake? What are the causes of earthquakes? Then finally, what are the different measures to be taken for earthquake? National level, state level, local level, who are the authorities responsible for that? So who is going to implement what? Under what time frame? All of this is discussed. That is what is basically plan. So in that, the major highlights, it provides for the comprehensive definition of various disasters in India. And it talks about both natural as well as man-made disasters. It provides for overall comprehensive definition which was not defined earlier. Second, it identifies 5 thematic areas of work. Five thematic areas. What do you mean by thematic areas? For each disaster, what are the 5 major targets which should be taken? 5 major activities which should be taken. That is what is thematic area. To deal with the particular disaster, what are the major activities or the initiatives? Okay, overall kya kya karna hai for every particular disaster. That is highlighted under 5 different headings. So that is what I said. It identifies 5 thematic areas. And these 5 thematic areas are directly inspired from 4 priorities set by Sendai framework. The Sendai framework sets 4 priorities in order to deal with disasters. And these 4 priorities are transformed into 5 thematic areas. वही almost same ही है. जो Sendai में 4 बोला था, यहाँ पर हमने 5 बना दिया. What are they? In Sendai, it was highlighted 4 priorities to deal with disaster. The first priority is to understand the disaster risk. Okay, let's say we are talking about earthquake. We need to understand what is the overall risk of earthquake in this country. How many cities are going to be impacted? Which are the areas are going to be impacted? That is what is understanding the disaster risk. The first thing we have to do. Second, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage the disaster risk. पहले तो risk समझ लिया, then we will strengthen the disaster risk governance. That means what are the various actions to be taken? What are the various initiatives to be taken in terms of the government, the setup, the inter-agency coordination there among the different departments, ये सारा चीज है. That is disaster risk governance. Government के तरफ से क्या करना है? To keep the institution ready. That is what is strengthening disaster risk governance. Third one, investing in disaster risk reduction. Investing matlab we need to invest money and develop the capacity to deal with disaster. That is what is disaster risk reduction. And fourth one, enhancing the disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better. ये term याद है? Policy में use किया था, the same one. To build back better in recovery, rehabilitation and reconstruction. The fourth priority is to be prepared for the disaster, and whenever a disaster happens, to provide effective response and to see the recovery rehabilitation as a opportunity to build back in a better manner. These 4 priorities were set by Sendai. उसी को ही हमने 5 बना दिया. देखो, first one, understanding disaster risk. That is understanding the risk. This is the first thematic area under the plan. Second one is inter-agency coordination, which refers to the strengthening of disaster risk governance. थर्ड वन इन्वेस्टिंग इन डिजास्टर रिस्क रिडक्शन. इन्वेस्टिंग इन डिजास्टर रिस्क रिडक्शन, यहां पर हमने दो बांट दिया, वन इज स्ट्रक्चरल मेजर्स करना है, अनदर वन नॉन स्ट्रक्चरल मेजर्स. ठीक है, दोनों अलग अलग कर दिया. फोर्थ वन इज एनहांसिंग द डिजास्टर प्रिपेयर्डनेस, दैट इज व्हाट इज कैपेसिटी डेवलपमेंट. Overall, the plan identifies 5 thematic areas. These are the 5 thematic areas. Please write these down. The 5 thematic areas identified by the national plan are these 5. Understanding the disaster risk, interagency coordination, investing in DRR, structural and non-structural, and then capacity development. The plan discusses every disaster from these 5 priorities, 5 different perspectives. हो गया. In addition to this, the 2016 plan targets certain time frame. It plans for 5-year, 10-year, 15 years of targets from 15 to 30. Okay, sorry, 16 to 30. The plan sets the time limit of short term, medium term, long term, various activities to be achieved in 5 years, 10 years and 15 years. At the same time, it also provides the checklist of different activities. Checklist of different activities such as early warning system, information dissemination, medical care. सेंडाई 4 नेक्स्ट लिख सकते हो, अभी के लिए वो 5 काफी था. सेंडाई 4 एनीवे यू विल हैव टू राइट इन सेंडाई. It provides the target of 5-year, 10-year, 15 years. It provides a checklist of various activities to be taken. And it also prescribes the roles and responsibilities at various different levels, national level, state level, district level, up to local level. For every disaster, what is the role and responsibility of every different organization? And it also talks for a responsible role for media. इसी का भी बात होता है क्योंकि मीडिया का रोल तो बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है in the context of disaster management, so that they don't spread panic. It also calls for ethical guidelines to media. These are the major highlights of the 2016 plan. Okay, question आया तो please try to remember this. What happened in 2019? National Disaster Management Plan of 2019. See, as a commitment to Sendai framework, we immediately brought a plan in 2016. But after that, we realized we wanted to update it with some more additions. Because the commitment was not only for Sendai. One for Sendai. Sendai framework extends between 2015 to 2030. Along with that, we also have Paris Agreement. Okay, which was signed in 2015. And along with that, we also have SDG goals to be achieved between 2015 to 2030. There was a need of coherence. There was a necessity of bringing coherence in all these different commitments which India had given to international community. In order to streamline this, we brought a new plan in 2019. Most of the things are same except some additions. What are the additions which we have made? क्या-क्या additions हमने लेके आया है in addition to whatever the important highlights? Let's just discuss the additions. You can remember the rest, everything to be same. Since India tries to achieve a coherence between the various agreements, which includes global warming, climate change also, along with these 5 thematic area, it has added a sixth thematic area, that is climate change risk management. Climate change risk management has been added as the sixth thematic area. यहां पर पहले 5 था, अभी 6 वाला ऐड किया है. Sixth one is added, that is climate change risk management. That is to see every disaster from the perspective of climate change. Climate change के context में इसको कैसे handle करना है, whether they are going to increase or decrease. If they are going to increase, what exactly we have to take measures. What other measures we should take in the context of climate change. All these. Second major initiative, major change which was done in 2019 plan, a new chapter has been added about mainstreaming. What do you mean by mainstreaming? Policy में देखा था ना, एक लाइन मैंने बोला था, mainstreaming disaster management into planning, developmental planning. The same thing has been given much more priority. Basically says that any kind of developmental activity, developmental plan, developmental policy by any ministry, any department of the government, they should give a perspective to disaster management. You should think from the context of disaster management. That is what is mainstreaming disaster management into developmental planning. It also adds a new chapter of social inclusion, which is very important in disaster management. Social inclusion talks about the vulnerable sections in the society and their capacity to deal with the disaster, how to improve that. And one more change, earlier we had given the targets of 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, that has been changed now to short term, medium term, long term. Short term of 2022, medium term of 2027 and the long term of 2030, so that we achieve a coherence in all the 3 international commitments. ठीक है, these are the major changes which are done. ये 4 पॉइंट ऐड रखो, मतलब याद रखो, उसके साथ में लिख देना, that is highlights of 2019 plan also. Now the last thing, criticism of National Disaster Management Plan. First important criticism is, it is said that whatever the activities which are suggested under the plan is too generic. Plan का मतलब ही specific होना चाहिए था. Various activities which are suggested under the National Disaster Management Plan are little bit too generic. It does not prescribe a very specific set of activities to be taken by different agencies. Paris का actually first commitment period ends by 2030. The first commitment period of Paris ends by 2030. That's why they were also trying to achieve coherence there. Okay, criticism लिखो, it is too generic. Second, even though we have fixed the deadlines, there are no specific targets or goals to be achieved. It talks about in a very general manner, overall. ये भी करेंगे, वो भी करेंगे, ये अचीव कर देंगे, we will achieve resilience, we will achieve sustainability. But it does not talk in a very specific manner that what are the major initiatives. These many initiatives are going to take by so and so. ऐसे तो कोई बात नहीं करता है. We are going to construct so many dams in order to reduce the floods, or we are going to rehabilitate so many communities. ऐसा कोई specific targets नहीं है. There are no specific targets on goals, and most importantly, there is no monitoring mechanism in the entire action plan. It talks about all big things, but it does not talk about monitoring and evaluation. And most importantly, there is no talk about funding at all. पैसे का बात ही नहीं हुआ है, कहां से पैसा आएगा, कौन देगा, इसके बारे में there is not much of talk. And also it does not take into consideration the private organizations and corporates. Private organizations and corporates are not at all involved in this, who are a major stakeholders in disaster management. Is that clear? You can talk about these under criticism. So these are the three major initiatives which India has taken. One is National Disaster Management Act, second one is National Disaster Management Policy, and third one is plan. We have two plans. One is 2016, another one is 2019. Major highlights yaad rakho, काफी है. Okay, now let's take a short break, and after the break we'll talk about the major initiatives taken at the international level. Fine. Then we'll start with the disasters of India, the major disasters of India. We'll talk about it briefly. Okay, let's take a short break and come back. So any doubts here? So these are the major national efforts. Let's talk about international initiatives taken. Very briefly, let's discuss this and move on to the next unit. International initiatives. So at the international level, we have three major world conferences. Let's just talk about that. Rest, there will be few more things which you have to discuss from the current context, which you will see in Mains 365, PT 365 and your monthly current affairs classes. तो वहाँ पर discuss होगा. अभी in this class, from the static point of view, we have three major international agreements or international summits which we can say. So let's just briefly talk about these. तीन के बारे में बात कर लेते. The first one is Yokohama Conference. The first one is Yokohama Conference. And the second one is Hyogo Conference. And third one is Sendai Conference. So all these three regions or places, they are in Japan only. Yokohama, Hyogo, Sendai. And Japan is a country, as I had told earlier, it is we can say it is the champion of disaster management in the world and has handled the various disasters in a very effective manner. So taking Japan as the lead, various countries wanted to strategize their policies and programs. So isliye we have this world conference. The first world conference is Yokohama. This was in 1994. This is the first world conference on disaster reduction. The first world conference on disaster reduction. Here, various countries who participated in this accepted. First, they accepted few important things. What are the things which they accepted at this conference? The first thing, there is an increase in the natural disasters in the world. particularly in the recent times, there has been increase in the natural disaster. 1994 में ही एक्सेप्ट कर लिया था, ये तो इंक्रीज हो गया है एंड और होने वाला है. It has happened and it is going to happen in the future also. That is what is increase in the natural disasters. There is an increase in the natural disasters. This has been accepted first. Second, the countries also accepted that the poor people are more impacted due to disasters. Why? Because they are more vulnerable, they have less capacity. The poor are more impacted because of their more vulnerability and less capacity. And between the different countries, it is the developing and less developed countries which are again more impacted. Developed countries, even though they are responsible for various different types of disasters, including the climate change and global warming, which are their responsibility of historical emissions, but they have the capacity to deal with the disasters. Unfortunately, it is the developing and less developed countries who are going to face the effects of disaster, and they don't have the capacity to deal with the disasters. So that's why in this first conference, the countries agreed to cooperate with each other. They agreed to cooperate with each other and strengthen the capability for prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. They said, itna sara to ho hi raha hai. We need to cooperate with each other. This is not something which individual countries can do. Many of the countries, for many of the countries, it is beyond their capacity. So we need to cooperate and strengthen the capability for prevention, mitigation, and preparedness. The topic of prevention, mitigation, preparedness came for the first time in 1994 Yokohama conference itself. पर उसके बाद में कोई भी ज्यादा बात ही नहीं किया था. Even take the example, after that we faced many disasters, but still we did not take any initiative till 2005. So this was the first international conference, first world conference we can say. The second world conference was supposed to have happened in 2004. Okay, it was supposed to have happened in 2004, but because of the deadly tsunami, it happened in 2005. 10 साल के बाद में करने वाले थे. And after the deadly tsunami of 2004, 1994, so as I said, few of the countries participated, not overwhelming participation, and not many countries took any efforts. By 2005, after the tsunami, they realized the impact of disasters. Everyone came running to this conference. This conference was one of the very successful one after the 2004 tsunami. This is the second world conference on disaster risk reduction. Second world conference on disaster risk reduction. पहले में था disaster reduction. Second में आ गया था disaster risk reduction. क्योंकि by then they had realized that it is very difficult to reduce the disaster. Let's reduce the risk associated with the disasters at least. And it came out with a Hyogo framework of dealing with disasters. It provided for a framework for all the participating countries. We don't have to remember the framework. We need to remember the Sendai framework. उसके बारे में बात करेंगे. So just remember this much, that it came out with Hyogo framework. And it also spoke about putting in place an international early warning system. International early warning system. Sorry, early warning, not system, early warning program. Because they had seen the impact of tsunami and they agreed that it is very important that there is a need of international cooperation to bring all the countries together, because it is very difficult for many small countries to act on these disasters by themselves. It aimed to put in place an international early warning program. This is majorly Hyogo. We'll come back here to understand what is the difference between Hyogo and Sendai. So then in 2015, after 10 years, the countries met in third World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction, which happened in Sendai. One of the major declaration made at Sendai is that it declared state has the primary responsibility to deal with disasters. State cannot escape from the responsibility of dealing with disasters. However, that should be shared with the local level communities, that is local governments and private sector too. State has the primary responsibility to deal with the disasters, but that should be shared with local government as well as the private sector. This was one of the major declarations made at the Sendai conference, and it came out with Sendai framework. Sendai framework is important. What is Sendai framework? What are the highlights of Sendai framework? Sendai framework gives a target of 15 years for all the participating countries. And the Sendai framework is a non-binding agreement. It is a non-binding agreement which has 7 targets and 4 priority areas. 4 priority areas we have already discussed. Understanding disaster risk, enhancing disaster risk governance, investing in disaster risk reduction, enhancing the disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction. Okay, 4 priority areas. You need to write this down. 4 priority areas and 7 targets. 4 priority areas याद रखो, 7 targets as it is याद रखने का जरूरी नहीं है. You don't have to remember that. It is highly unlikely that the question will come from this area, asking you to tell what are the targets under Sendai. But overall, at least try to remember, out of 7 targets, 4 targets aim to reduce something and 3 targets aim to increase something. There are 4 reduction targets, 3 increase targets. What are the reduction targets? Reduction in the mortality, reduction in the affected people, reduction in the economic loss, and reduction in the damage to critical infrastructure. All these things should be reduced. All these damages by the disaster. We have to reduce that. All these 4 reductions and 3 increase. What are the 3 increase? To increase the countries with their own national disaster strategies. The first increase should be to increase the countries with their national disaster strategy. Under this only India agreed and had committed, and we brought the national disaster management plan. That is our national strategy. It basically said सबको एक strategy बनाना है अपना, बस जो strategy है वो अपना आप देख लेना, but we need to have the strategy at least. That is, we need to increase those countries. We need to increase the international cooperation. We need to increase the availability and access to early warning system. Overall, just remember that there are reduction as well as increasing targets, 7 targets, but you need to remember these 4. 4 priority areas under Sendai. Now, if I ask what is the difference between Sendai and Hyogo, major differences. Hyogo targeted reducing loss. It aimed to reduce loss. Sendai aimed to reduce risk. दोनों में क्या डिफरेंस है? कैन somebody tell me the difference between reducing loss and reducing risk? Anyone? Loss can also be pre-disaster. So we shifted the approach in Yokohama itself. In Yokohama itself, we shifted the approach to pre-disaster. So basically reducing loss means it includes all the activities, including those activities which escapes from the loss. Reducing loss nahi hona chahiye, that is the target. It may involve the activities where you can shift out the people, where you can move away from the people, move the people away from the disaster affected region. That also reduces the loss. Basically, reducing loss is a kind of escapist approach. Reducing risk is to stand there and to fight. Okay, simple example. यूपीएससी के बारे में मैंने पहले ही एग्जांपल दिया था. If you want to reduce the loss in the process of UPSC, don't give UPSC attempt. That is, you will be sure loss is reduced. Reducing the risk is to give UPSC attempt and to prepare thoroughly. Okay, attending test series, practicing answers, all that is reducing the risk. Right? The proactive approach is reducing risk. Reducing loss is basically escapist approach. ठीक है? Hyogo aimed to reduce the impact of disaster. Sendai aimed to reduce the size of disaster itself. Fine? Why? Risk reduction means capacity development. That is important, rather, because we cannot escape from everything, right? So it is bound to happen. Disasters are bound to happen. You move from one place to another. It's fine. So that is a major difference. Basically, Hyogo is like fearful approach, dharawa approach. Okay, so there is no escape. There is no escape is Sendai. Let's face it. In addition to this, Hugo talked about majorly what to do. Sendai talks about how to do. Hugo में बात हुआ था what exactly are to be done, what are the things to be achieved, but Sendai talks about how to achieve that, which is very important. And most importantly, it is the Sendai which talks about building resilience. Remember this word, resilience. It is important even for your UPSC preparation too. What do you mean by resilience? In case of Sendai, it spoke only about the loss. Let's reduce loss. Here, let's not worry too much about loss. Let's build resilience. है ना, बड़ा चीजें अचीव करना तो लॉस तो होगा ही होगा. Why to worry about the loss? Rather than let's increase our capacity, right? What do you mean by resilience? Resilience is our capacity to adapt to changes. जो भी चैलेंज आएगा मैं फेस करूंगा. यूपीएससी में यही अप्रोच चाहिए ना आपको. You will face all the difficulties from personal end, family end, societies end, at the institution end. All the difficulties you will face. The thing is, you cannot be prepared always. Okay, uncertainty is bound to happen. Uncertain outcomes are bound to happen. If you are ready to face it and fight it out, that is what is resilience. You need to adjust. You need to adapt. Right? So, जो भी चीज आएगा, you should be ready. Okay, I am ready to do this. You might get low marks in prelims test, classroom test, fine, but work upon that. Okay, you don't give up, you work upon that, you improvise, score well in the next one. Even if it is a gradual change, it's fine, but you need to adapt, you need to change gradually. You need to change to the situation as per the demand. That is what is resilience. Right? Same thing is required in disaster management also. So that is second unit. Any doubts here? Shall we proceed to the third unit? Okay, good. So you guys have been cooperating. So let's try to finish our syllabus in the next class itself, that is tomorrow, disaster management. So let's start with the third unit, that is disasters in India. In that, the first part is classification of disasters. Classification of disasters. So how do we classify the disasters in India? हमारा प्लान में ही दिया है. कौन सा प्लान? नेशनल डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट प्लान. The National Disaster Management Plan classify the India's disasters into 5 different categories. Please keep writing. The first one, geophysical disasters. Geophysical disasters. What are geophysical disasters? These are the disasters due to the geological processes or phenomena that causes disasters. These are the disasters due to geophysical processes or phenomena. मतलब जियोलॉजिकली कोई चेंजेस है लैंडफॉर्म में, टोपोग्राफी में, that is causing the changes and that is causing the disasters. Example, earthquake, volcanic eruptions, mass movements, etc. They're all geophysical disasters. Second type of disasters are hydrological disasters. Hydrological disasters. What are hydrological disasters? These are the disasters caused by the deviations from the normal water levels of different water bodies. जो नॉर्मल वाटर लेवल से डिविएशन हो गया, दैट इज व्हाट इज हाइड्रोलॉजिकल डिजास्टर्स. बेस्ट एग्जांपल इज फ्लड, लैंडस्लाइड्स, कोस्टल एरोजन. Hydrological disasters are caused by the deviation in normal water cycle. Or overflowing of water bodies. Example, floods, landslides, coastal erosion, etc. Third and fourth bada confusing hai. Let me just write both. Third one is meteorological. Fourth one is climatological. What is the difference between these two? Is there any actual difference between meteorological disaster and climatological disaster? Can somebody tell me? Geophysical definition is geological disasters caused by geological processes or phenomena. Disasters caused by geological processes or phenomena. So now tell me what is the difference between meteorological and climatological. ओके, ठीक है, स्टिल गुड एफर्ट अंशुल. एनीथिंग एल्स? ठीक है, दैट इज ऑल्सो ए गुड गेस. Fine. Let me tell you, meteorological, that does not mean that they are caused by meteorites or from the space. See, meteorological means the atmospheric condition. Meteorology is to study the atmosphere, study the weather pattern. That is what is meteorology. Okay? So then what is the difference between meteorological and climatological? See, one is temporary short term, another one is permanent long term. If there are any changes which are happening in the atmosphere in a short level, like few hours to few days, maybe from few minutes to few hours or to few days, if there is any changes which are happening in the Earth's atmosphere and that is causing a disaster, that is what we call it as meteorological. Please write, meteorological are short-lived processes in the atmosphere short-lived processes in the atmosphere. Pawan Kumar, very good. आपका एग्जाम्पल बढ़िया है. That is right. Short-lived processes in the atmosphere, extending few minutes to days. Few minutes to days. Examples: cyclone. Cyclone will be there for few days. Tornado, few minutes. Heat wave, cold wave, few days. Okay, 2-3 days. Heat wave, cold wave. Climatological is little bit long term, maybe seasonal, macro scale. Okay, little bit longer than meteorological. Please write. These are long-lived macro scale processes of atmosphere, such as drought, drought, glacial lake outburst flood, glacial lake outburst flood, forest fire. Forest fire, even though it will be there for few days, the conditions is not for few days. It has been there for continuous, मतलब 1-2 महीने तक वो ड्राई रहेगा, इसलिए वहां पर फॉरेस्ट फायर होगा. ठीक है. So example: drought, glacial lake outburst flood and forest fire. Fifth one: biological disasters with organic origin. With organic origin, that is from various organisms, from micro to macro. With organic origin or biological vectors. Or biological vectors. Example: insect infestation, epidemics, insect infestation, epidemics, etc. Is that clear? Any other doubts? So let's talk about the first major disaster of India, that is earthquake. Earthquake के बारे में बात करते हैं. Yes, COVID-19 is an example of biological disaster. Yes. We'll talk about the biological disaster in the end. So let's begin with few important disasters. First one being earthquake. चलो earthquake आज खत्म करते हैं. See, every disaster will have a general framework. Please remember this general framework. Overall topic क्या क्या question आ सकता है. Okay. Any disaster for that matter. The first thing you need to remember is the definition of that particular disaster. If it is earthquake, definition of earthquake. If it is flooding, definition of flooding. Like that. Start with the definition. And the second thing is, what are the causes for that disaster? And usually causes includes both natural causes as well as anthropogenic. Please write about both the causes. And the third one is areas impacted by this particular disaster in India. So here you need to write a map for sure. You will get an extra mark for that. You need to write area impacted. Fourth one, the measures to be taken in case of pre-disaster, during disaster, post-disaster. Overall management mein what are the various measures to be taken? In this context, use the guidelines given by NDMA. Very, very important. If you mention as per the NDMA guidelines ऐसे बोल के ये measures लिख दिया तो पूरा अच्छा marks मिल जाएगा आपको. If there are any initiatives taken in that particular disaster, please write that also. So is that clear? This is the overall structure of disasters in India. Chemical related disasters are not classified by our national plan. So this national plan just gives the broader idea of overall disaster. Iske alawa there are few disasters which are not categorized, so it's okay. Fine. So with this framework, let's start with the first one. That is earthquake. What is the definition of earthquake? What do you mean by earthquake? Can somebody define earthquake? See, earthquake is basically sudden vibrations felt in the upper surface of Earth's layers. Sudden vibrations felt in the upper layers of Earth due to the release of energy. Due to the release of energy from Earth's interior. Sudden vibrations felt in the upper layers of Earth due to the release of energy from the Earth's interior, causing the transient disturbance, of equilibrium in rocks. So basically, whenever there is an earthquake, there is release of some kind of energy, the built up energy in the lower layers, which causes vibrations in the top layers and shakes the entire top layer which is under equilibrium. That is what is earthquake. Right? I hope you would have studied in detail about earthquakes, plate tectonics, the different types of earthquake zones, P waves, S waves, ये सारा चीजें आपने cover किया होगा. I'm not going to talk about that. So that also saves our time in terms of talking about causes of earthquakes. सबको पता है what causes earthquakes? tectonic plates, movement of tectonic plates, volcanic activity, landslides. Anything else? Meteoritic impact, subsidence of land. All of these are natural causes. सारा डिस्कस हुआ होगा, I assume, geography में. The cause of earthquake. Definition, somebody just please copy paste if at all you have written it. Anshul is asking. Causes, बताइए causes तो डिस्कस हुआ होगा क्लास में. The plate movements, the volcanic eruption, landslides, meteoritic impact and the land subsidence. What are the anthropogenic causes of earthquakes? Mining, blasting activities, nuclear explosions. And then reservoir induced seismicity. Anthropogenic causes डिस्कस हुआ है. ठीक है. सी ये सारा चीजें causes आप लिख ही सकते हो. You can write this. Regions impacted by earthquakes in India. You need to write this map. इतना डिफिकल्ट नहीं है ऐसे लगता है. So basically earthquake zones in India, overall there are 5 zones. कहीं पे भी if you are talking about earthquakes, remember there are 5 zones in earthquakes. Zone 1, Zone 2, Zone 3, Zone 4, Zone 5. 5 zones रहेगा. Zone 1 is the least probability of earthquake. Zone 5 is the highest probability of earthquake. मतलब यहां पर सबसे ज्यादा डैमेज होगा in Zone 5. In Zone 1 there is a very low probability of damage due to earthquake. But India में there is no Zone 1. There is no Zone 1 at all. That means any area earthquake can happen. There is no safe zone at all. In India we have Zone 5 to Zone 2. Zone 5, highest probability. Please remember these zones. Please note down also. The entire northeast is Zone 5. Entire northeast is Zone 5 because it is at the junction. है ना, सिंटैक्शियल बेंड है ना यहां पर. हिमालयस का भी है यहां पर. ये जो हमारा म्यांमार एरिया का भी है, अर्कनियोमा, उसका बीच में है. देयर इज higher probability of earthquake in the entire northeast. Zone 5 completely northeast. Second zone, the Nepal border of Bihar. Nepal border of Bihar. Third, Uttarakhand. All of these are Zone 5 I'm talking about. Uttarakhand near Nanda Devi. Zone 5s. Nanda Devi in Uttarakhand. In Himachal, around Dharamshala, and then the Kashmir Valley, and then Western Gujarat, जहां पर भुज अर्थक्वेक हुआ था. And then Andaman Nicobar, again this is also, there is subduction here along the Java Trench, right? Zone 5 हो गया. These are very high intensity, higher probability of earthquakes. What about zone 4? Little bit lower probability than zone 5, which includes the rest of Himalayas other than zone 5. ठीक है, जोन 5 बता देता हूं. देखो, नॉर्थ ईस्ट, नेपाल बॉर्डर ऑफ बिहार, नंदा देवी रीजन इन उत्तराखंड, धर्मशाला इन हिमाचल प्रदेश, एंड कश्मीर वैली. नॉर्थन गुजरात अराउंड कच्छ रीजन, एंड देन अंडमान निकोबार आइलैंड्स. So why Gujarat? Yes, that's a very interesting question. यहां पर एक fault line है. There is a fault line, that is Allaband fault. Allaband fault. There is a fault line called as Allaband fault. It is an active fault line which has the higher probability of earthquake. You would have read about fault line in geography, right? So there is a fault line here which is active. That is zone 5. Zone 4 कौन सा है? The entire rest of Himalayas except zone 5. The northern plains including Delhi. Delhi का देखो. One of the highest probability. Of course, the highest नहीं है. Still very high probability. Northern plain including Delhi and NCR. The surrounding regions of rest of zone 5. Okay, गुजरात है, गुजरात के बगल में सराउंडिंग में वी हैव जोन 4. एंड द वेस्टर्न पार्ट ऑफ महाराष्ट्र विच इज वेरी वेल नोन फॉर लातूर अर्थक्वेक. लातूर अर्थक्वेक 1994. यहां पर भी एक फॉल्ट लाइन है, इसलिए जोन 4, बट इट इज नॉट वेरी एक्टिव. सो रेस्ट ऑफ हिमालयास, नॉर्थन प्लेन्स, surrounding Kutch, and then western Maharashtra and the Ganga Delta. That is zone 4. Zone 3 छोड़ो, let's see zone 2. मतलब the most safe zones in India. Most of them are plateau regions. Can you see Karnataka, Telangana, Rayalaseema plateau? विदर्भा प्लाटू, छत्तीसगढ़, ओडिशा, झारखंड, दैट इज सदर्न झारखंड, नॉर्दर्न मध्य प्रदेश एंड राजस्थान, एंड मेजर पार्ट ऑफ तमिलनाडु. ये जो हार्ड रॉक प्लाटू रीजन है ना, वन ऑफ द मोस्ट स्टेबल, बट स्टिल दैट इज ऑल्सो जोन 2 ओनली. बाकी सारा जोन 3, रेस्ट एवरीथिंग. एंड मेजरली जोन 3 इज अलोंग द रिवर वैलीज. कहां पर? कृष्णा गोदावरी रिवर वैली, महानदी रिवर वैली, रेस्ट ऑफ गंगा रिवर वैली, नर्मदा तापी रिवर वैली, एंड द एंटायर वेस्टर्न घाट्स, लक्षद्वीप. सो बेस्ट है कि जोन 5, जोन 4 एंड जोन 2 याद रखो. बाकी सारा जोन 3 आप खुद लिख सकते हो. You can write about zone 3 by yourself. Now, let's talk about few of the examples of earthquakes. इस बार क्वेश्चन आ गया था. Anyway, I discuss few of the important examples of earthquakes, and luckily this question came this year. India में what are the major earthquakes in the recent time? Any examples? Can somebody give the examples of recent major earthquakes in India? Major earthquake. Okay, चलो लिखते जाओ. The first one, the major, सबसे खतरनाक वाला earthquake था 2001 भुज earthquake. In the recent times, I am talking about 20-30 years of the recent times. 2001 Bhuj earthquake, magnitude of 7.7. 7.7 magnitude Bhuj earthquake, which killed nearly 20,000 people. Fine. Second one, Kashmir earthquake of 2005. Kashmir earthquake of 2005. You might be thinking, Kashmir में earthquake हुआ था क्या? Yes, हुआ था. That happened not in Indian part of Kashmir, but Pakistan occupied Kashmir, which is officially part of India, so we should consider this also the major earthquake of India. In October 2005, there was a major earthquake of 7.6 magnitude. Bhuj was 7.7 magnitude. Kashmir earthquake of 2005 was 7.6 magnitude, 7.6 magnitude. The entire Pakistan occupied Kashmir was totally devastated. It killed nearly more than 80,000 people. Third major earthquake, 2011 Sikkim Nepal border earthquake. सिक्किम नेपाल बॉर्डर में अर्थक्वेक हुआ था इन 2011. It was of 6.9 magnitude. It happened near Kanchenjunga region, and luckily, fortunately, not many people died because this region was not populated. Yes, it impacted Indian Kashmir also, but luckily it did not cause much damage here. As that it caused the damage in the Pakistan occupied Kashmir. Third one, Nepal earthquake of 2011. Nepal Sikkim border में हुआ था 6.9, but it did not cause major loss near Kanchenjunga area. Fourth one, Latur earthquake of 1994. Latur earthquake of 1994, which was 6.2 magnitude. 6.2 magnitude 1994 में तो कुछ भी preparedness नहीं था. There was no safety mechanism at all. It killed a large number of people. Nearly 10,000 people died in this. (1991). Okay, fifth one, 1991 Uttarkashi earthquake. 1991 Uttarkashi earthquake. 6.1 magnitude. It killed nearly 1,000 people. In Chamoli, Uttarkashi, Tehri district of Uttarakhand. Then 2015 Nepal earthquake. It did not happen in India, but still the surrounding regions of India was also impacted. It was felt, the vibrations were felt. It was of 7.8 magnitude, one of the very highest. 7.8 magnitude में हुआ था, which killed many people in Nepal. It caused a huge landslide in Nepal. near Mount Everest, right? And सबसे famous 2004 earthquake in Indonesia. It impacted the entire Indian region, which caused tsunami. And this was the highest, that is 9.1 magnitude. India में नहीं हुआ था, but surrounding में ही है, अंडमान निकोबार के पास में ही है, but its impact was felt in India also. ठीक है? Yes, Himalayas, Kashmir Valley, one of the most prone. Northeast also one of the most prone. It's important that we need to be prepared. We need to understand the risk of earthquake and take the measures accordingly, which usually we don't. We need to bring more awareness. We need to sensitize people in that context. So we need to discuss about the measures suggested by NDMA. We'll talk about this tomorrow, and we'll also talk about the other disasters of India. देखो, disasters is a very wide area. Particularly the initiatives and the measures suggested by NDMA. सारा disasters का सारा measures class में discuss करने में ज़्यादा कुछ फायदा नहीं है. Because many of them are just repetitive. Let's do one thing. Tomorrow I'll put the measures in a PPT. है ना, जो एनडीएमए का मेजर्स है, 5-6 मेजर्स, मेजर हेडिंग्स होगा, उतना याद रख लिया तो काफी है. एनडीएमए गाइडलाइंस के हिसाब से पूरा डिटेल में याद नहीं रहेगा. अगर इतना ही याद रख लिया तो अब बढ़िया बात है. So I'll put that in the PPT, I'll show it in the class and I'll give it to you so that we can save time and we can discuss other important area, and let's try to finish up tomorrow. Fine. So I'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much. Please revise once and come. Yeah, I'll see you guys.